What's up, guys? Welcome to week 5 of building our Thompson Center reboot of the 19th century Hawken style muzzleloader rifle. Now, last week we finished our 6-hour marathon of polishing the barrel using the draw filing technique outlined in the instructions. It was a ton of work, and I'm finally starting to regain feeling in my thumbs, but man, oh man, was it worth it, because that sucker is smooth. We also spent some time rough sanding the stock, and I thought that we were done and ready to move on to finer grit sandpapers. But then I remembered that there's a few areas where the hardware gets attached to the stock. There's a pocket cut out, and all those pockets are deeper than the hardware is thick. So we're going to have to carefully sand down the area around those pockets so that the transition from the wood stock to the metal hardware is smooth and flush. It's going to look and feel better, but also if we don't finish it and just leave that hanging out there, it's really going to null and void all the work that we put into other attributes of this project as an indicator of shoddy craftsmanship. Now, this week, we're going to smooth out those transition zones. We're going to progress to finer grit sandpaper around the entirety of the stock. And if there's time, we're going to start polishing the hardware using some of those techniques we learned working on that barrel. So let's do it. All right, I think we've got everything we need to get started here. We've got the 4 pieces of hardware for which the pockets need to be smoothed out, and that is the trigger plate, the lock plate, the barrel tang, and the trigger guard. And all that I plan on needing to use to get that done is just our 150 grit sand block here, but we've also got some loose 150 sandpaper, and just in case things get ugly, we've got a crosscut file and even a rasp. Okay, so the first area that we're going to work on is the pocket for what's called the barrel tang. We got it started, but when we look at it a little more closely, you can see along this back edge here, there's a little bit of a lip. See if I use my knife, you can kind of, you can go down, but you can't go up. So I took the screws out. So, we'll take it out, sand it, put the screws back in, or put the tang back in, just keep going back and forth until it's flush. This is what it looks like now. You can see that gap back here. And when we're done, we want it to look like, like that. Don't pay attention to this front edge here. That looks worse than it is because of the shadow, but look along this back edge. We want it to look like that, whereas right now, watch this back edge, it looks like that. Okay, so the next piece of hardware is the trigger plate here. And I don't know if you can see, but we're actually at a really smooth transition in the back here. But up by the trigger, we got another ledge just like we did on the tang. Again, the knife can go down, but if you go back, it won't go up. It gets stuck on the ledge there, on the difference there between those two heights. So we're gonna sand some area, but this is smooth, so I don't wanna sand over here. So I'm gonna make a little pencil mark, kind of telling me where to start. And then up in this area, I don't have to worry too much because this is where the trigger guard goes. And the trigger guard here is already thicker than the pocket here. So I'm not about to chisel this out further so that this can sit flush. So we're just going to leave this area as is. I'll probably go around the edge here again with a little sandpaper just to break the edge so that it's not so sharp and prone to chipping. But so if I put this here, I'll put another pencil mark here to kind of tell me where I can stop sanding. Okay, now something that I wanted to point out though is I already drilled the hole through here into the stock for this screw.
that secures the trigger plate to the stock. But I can't, but see how there's wiggle in here. See, the pocket is longer and wider than the trigger plate. I'm sorry, yeah, the trigger plate hardware here. So I can't remember if where I had this floating when I drilled that hole. So that it could have been a mistake. There's not too much I could do. I could plug this hole up and try to re-drill it, but on this project, I don't know if I want to risk doing that. Like I said, the pocket is wider, so we'll never be able to get rid of this gap unless, I don't know, I don't think I could put like wood putty in a project like this. I think it would just crumble and fall out over time. So I'll look into it. Maybe there's something we can do, but the best that we could do that I think would be acceptable is, if we can't get rid of this gap, we could try to make it even all the way around at least. So I'm hoping that where I had this hole will secure the trigger plate even left and right, and then in a spot forward and back so that this gap is maintained. See how much, see like this would have the gap all the way over here, or this would have no gap here but gap all the way here. But if we centered it and just tried to maintain an even gap all the way around, I think that still looks pretty sharp. Again, on the camera here, this gap looks wider than that just because we're a little bit of an angle, but I think that would look good. So we'll see if I got the screw in the right place. But in the meantime, we're gonna sand in this area here until this is flush, and then over here, like I said, we'll just hit that edge lightly so it doesn't chip on us. All right, I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, it got better. It looks like there's a ledge, or a height difference in between the wood and the metal, and there's not. It's very smooth. You can see I can rub my pencil back and forth without it getting hung up, going either way. There's a shadow here, and that's just the gap in between the trigger plate and the wood. And it doesn't look bad. Again, like I said, if we can center that gap and maintain it evenly around the whole piece of hardware. So we'll have to see if we get lucky by the time we put that screw in, if this all stays in the same spot. I imagine it's probably not going to be perfect, and it's going to look great. And as soon as we start tightening the screw down, it's going to go, and move, and we're going to get something like a big gap over here. If that's the case, I don't know what we'll do. Like I said, I probably won't want to plug that up and re-drill it. I've done that before and it works fine, but it is one thing when you're making a piece of furniture, and I got, I can go to Home Depot and get another piece of wood if I need to, but I really don't want to risk cracking this thing. So I'll probably just leave it and look into, maybe there's like a putty, like wood putty or something. I doubt that's going to work. I'm hoping if we do end up with a situation like this where there's a big gap on one side, I'm hoping that by the time we color the metal, blacken it or blue it or brown it or whatever, I'm hoping that the dark metal and the dark wood will make this, will kind of hide this gap. It's also on the bottom of the gun, so that kind of helps a little bit. But again, I really don't want to feel like we're trying to get away with anything. So that might be something we have to look into when it comes time for getting close to final assembly. All right, it's not a coincidence that this one's last. This is for the lock plate. And if I drop it in here, it might not look too bad in some areas. But if you look, there's definitely a ledge here. The pencil's stopping, so I got to remove material here. And if you look all the way over here, you can see it looks like a 1/16 of an inch. And if we look on the bottom side here, oh boy, yeah, there's at least an 1/8 inch of material here that needs to be removed. So we got a little bit of work to do, but it's coming along pretty good, so I'm not overly worried about it. All right, you probably can't see from the camera, but I flipped the gun around. For whatever reason, most of the time I work on it, it seems like it's made sense to have the butt towards me, just because that's normally how you hold a rifle. But this thing is so back heavy that if I flipped it around and I had the butt hanging off the edge of the table over here, I'm really worried about, I'm gonna go to take these clamps off and I'm not gonna realize it and the thing's gonna fall on the ground and crack. So that's why I've flipped it around. So I have to remove more material down here than I do up here. So I'm not gonna try and get this edge down flat and then do this. I'm gonna try and bring the high spots down so that we have an even height difference all the way around, and then I'm gonna try and go around the whole thing, to bring it all down at the same time. So I am gonna start with this 60 grit block, because we'll be here all night if I try to take all this down with 150. I don't think, I'm gonna avoid using the file or the rasp, because I don't wanna risk taking off too much material. So here we go. Okay, something I noticed is if I try to just take off material here, I'm gonna have a tendency for this corner to dig in to the pocket here. So I'm gonna put the whole sanding block over, but I'm gonna favor it towards this side. So even though it might be rubbing on this a little bit, it'll be removing much more material on this side. Let's see how that works. Okay, this is kind of hard to explain, but I've got a pretty even gap from here all the way around to here. This surface here is pretty close. So when I push on the sanding block, I'm gonna be putting pressure on these 3 points, like kind of going up into that corner. So hopefully that'll remove material here, here, and here without removing too much material here. All right, well that sure worked out nicely. You can see the pencil's going right across there. It's not getting hung up going either way. And especially on this bottom side where there's that big line before. You can see it just goes right over. So that looks nice. Again, you can see a little line here. A little shine, I see like that light mark. And that's from the little chamfer that we put on by going around real lightly with the with the sandpaper, just to break that edge. And I like that. I think that looks nice and it's functional. Lock plate.
All right, well, now that we got the depth for all the pockets of that hardware timed out so that the hardware is going to sit flush with the face of the stock, I think we're officially done with our 150 grit sandpaper and we can get rid of the sanding block. And we're going to move on to our 220 grit sandpaper that isn't really going to remove a lot of material. It's not really going to change the shape of our stock. It's just going to smooth out the surface. It's going to improve the surface finish, so to speak, of the wood. So I don't think we have to worry about using a sanding block. I think it's going to be a lot easier to just use our hands to allow the sandpaper to flow over the gentle contours of the project. And I think it's going to work out just fine. I also put a picture up showing the difference between our 60, 150, and 220 grit sandpaper in case you're not familiar. I'm trying to use long, smooth strokes going along the length of the stock with the grain, not against the grain. I know when you sand wood that you're going to stain, it's extra important that you have a consistent surface finish across the entire project, because if there's areas that are like smoother than others, they will accept the stain differently than areas that might be rougher. Now, I mean, we want this project to be smooth and consistent anyways, but I don't know, I mean, we're not gonna stain this because it's walnut, it's too pretty just to stain, but I don't know if that would affect the way that it would accept an oil, like linseed oil or tung oil or whatever it is we might put on here. But nevertheless, we're still going to obviously try to make it as consistent as we can. So just another thing to keep our eyes on.
All right, something I wanted to show you. This is the bottom of the stock. This is where that trigger plate goes. Is something I'm noticing with the 220 grit sandpaper is if there's a spot that wasn't smoothed out enough by the 150. So let's say we hit it with the 60, and then we hit it with the 150, or even if we did the 150 but not going along the grain but across the grain or at an angle, you know, there would be all sorts of little lines, you know, to the tune of 150 per inch, but they'd be hiding. I wouldn't be able to see them. So when I'm going over with the 220, what'll happen is if those lines are too deep, you know, you can see one here and one here, those lines will get highlighted because as I sand with the 220 isn't really going to smooth those out. They're just too deep. But the sanding dust will fill in there, and the sanding dust is going to be a lighter color, so it really makes those stand out. So I could work on this line here, that line there, all day with the 220. I don't think it's going anywhere, so I'm going to have to go over this spot with the 150 again, making sure to go along the length of the grain, and then I'll go back with the 220, and this will be nice and clean. All gone.
All right, I think we're done with the 220. I'm gonna go take a picture of this under the microscope so that we have something to compare, you know, the as received condition after the 150, after the 220, and see if you can, I can feel the difference, but we'll see if we can see the difference too, you know, at the close-ups on the grain. All right, so we got all those areas where the hardware wasn't sitting flush with the wood straightened out. We also got the entire stock smooth sanded with 220 grit sandpaper. Now I wasn't sure if we should move on to even finer grit sandpaper, so I looked in the instructions. Now the instructions didn't specify how fine of a grit sandpaper to use, but I stumbled upon the section that talks about treating the wood surface, and it says that after you apply whatever it is you're going to finish with, an oil or a lacquer, it'll raise the grain, so you're going to have to resand it anyways. So I think I'm going to stick with the 220 since we're going to have to resand it anyways. Then it goes on to mention two things that caught my interest. One, it says after the grain has been raised and the stock resanded and buffed. I've never buffed wood before, so I don't really know what goes into that, but I look forward to learning. Maybe it's like buffing a linoleum floor. I imagine we're going to get a cloth and obtain some buffing compound of some sort and go to work on the stock. And the second thing it says a preliminary treatment of filling the grain is required. This filling process produces a glass smooth surface for the stock finish and is highly recommended. Consult your dealer for information on commercial stock fillers and follow the manufacturer's instructions. I've never heard of a stock filler before, but I look forward to going online, seeing what I can get my hands on and seeing just how smooth we can get this thing. Now, also in this section, it says basically finishes fall into two categories of dull or high gloss. For dull, it says you'll use an oil, and for high gloss, you use a lacquer finish. I have always preferred dull, satin, flat finishes on wood. So we're definitely going to use an oil to finish the stock. All right, well that's it for this week. I'm really happy with the progress we made. We didn't make a lot of sawdust or shavings, but I'm really happy with the work that we got done, because some of those details really pay off in the long run, like making sure all that hardware is nice and flush with the stock, and also that the stock is smooth and uniform. So next week, we're going to draw file and finish the last of the hardware. It doesn't look like it's too much. They're kind of funny shaped parts, but I don't really expect them to take very long. Now there's also a little bit of work to do to the ramrod assembly, but after that, it's time to finish the stock. So I got to do some research and find the best stock finishing kits available that are going to give us that nice satin finish we're looking for, and also includes a stock filler like the instructions we're referencing. Thanks again for watching, guys. Be well.